Hello, listeners, and welcome to Disgruntled Musings, a compilation of quick commentary on the latest socio-political news and updates from across the Caribbean region. I'm your host, Shem Best, a podcast producer here at the CPSI. For our first headline, the U.S. State Department issues warnings for Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. Despite what would appear to be new advisories issued in response to concerning levels of crime and unrest, these warnings have actually been in effect for the better part of the last half-decade and don't necessarily indicate any true level of change in the safety levels for either country. While the advisories tend to bristle the foreign ministries of both nations, the net effect is quite negligible. Tourists have not been deterred from visiting either Port of Spain or Kingston, though comparatively Trinidad and Tobago has a fairly minuscule tourism industry and very little to lose from what is essentially a diplomatic Yelp review from the country that boasts its own staggering number of monthly shootings. Trinidad's advisory warns about high levels of gang violence and even some possible terrorist activity. The Jamaican advisory reissued last year threw a health bulletin into the mix, citing overwhelmed medical services. There was some general displeasure among local tourism heads over this stance, despite the fact that these warnings had already been in place for some time, were simply being reposted and likely to be ignored by the average traveler as usual. Next up, news from the 47th CARICOM head meeting in Grenada, where Curaçao's membership in CARICOM has finally been inked. The sea in the ABC Islands was unceremoniously announced as the newest associate state in CARICOM, joining the likes of Anguilla, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, and Turks and Caicos. I could easily fill this segment with updates on the price of rice in China, as they probably have a more profound effect on the lives of Caribbean citizens. Actually, given Barbados' recent foray into rice growing, this is less hyperbole than we may realize. Associate states serve absolutely no purpose in the Caribbean community. CARICOM itself, being the failed union that it is, props up the organization's relevance with purely symbolic relationships, bilateral agreements, and MOUs with various vassals of the European Union. Strip away the diplomatic fluff and you quickly notice that associate members do not offer any legitimate input, do not have a clearly defined role, and they only sit in on meetings because mom and dad, their parent countries, won't let them forge any useful ties without consent. For obvious reasons, of course. Cough, immigration. This is hot on the heels of Bermuda, indicating its desire to graduate to being a full member of CARICOM. Hold your applause, because this also basically means nothing. Sure, there are some perks such as trade deals and travel agreements, but the real meat, or rather the true boys club of CARICOM, is the CSME. It's got all the bells and whistles of a would-be federation, the freedom of movement, skills, etc., and sadly, none of the legislative willpower. 12 of CARICOM's 15 member states are in the CSME, but none of them have actually ratified freedom of movement, and only allow up to 6 months of residence for any non-native citizens within their own borders. This is a rather impotent show of effort among these territories, which all purport to be eager to show some sort of united front on the world stage. Staying in the Lesser Antilles, the Connect Caribe ferry receives some sort of industry blessing, I guess. The long-awaited ferry service aimed at connecting Barbados, Trinidad, and Guyana was given the thumbs up by the Barbados hospitality industry. Pleon Group, based in Barbados, which leads the consortium spearheading this ferry initiative, received strong support from several tourism and travel heads, particularly in Barbados. Pomp and pageantry aside, it should be noted that during the media tour of this entire effort, its creators have primarily pushed the trade aspect of the connecting route, i.e. the ease of moving goods between the three territories. Movement of people, the part that makes it an actual ferry, that's been oddly absent from most of the promotional buzz surrounding this project. It should be noted as well that, while strange but not expected, that none of the three participating countries appear to have a clue on how to handle the logistics of using the ferry as an actual ferry. There's been no word on immigration checks or processes associated with the service, which brings the initial floated ticket cost of around $100 into question. Not to stray into speculation, but it wouldn't be far-fetched to imagine that even the consortium is doubtful as to the actual profitability of such a passenger service. After all, most incumbent equivalents, the incumbent equivalent, that is Caribbean Airlines, has struggled to streamline its own routes between these countries in a way that could bring prices down to freedom of movement levels. If you're tired of hearing that term, so am I. It's supposed to be one of the principal pillars of the CARICOM single market and economy, and yet none of its members possess the know-how to make it happen. Most forms of travel between the islands are prohibitively expensive and certainly don't encourage the ease of travel that they're trying to emulate vis-a-vis the EU. Not to be the bearer of bad news, but until the groundwork is laid for the logistics of hopping on a boat in Trinidad and showing up in Barbados, this one might meet the same fate as Liat in record time. Heading over to St. Vincent, we see congratulatory messages from one despot to another. Venezuela's elections have just concluded, and to the surprise of no one, had been jerry-rigged for a Maduro victory, even if Christ the Lord himself had been on the ballot. No one took the time to explain this to Ralph Gonsalves. However, the 77-year-old Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines continues to show why geriatric individuals shouldn't be allowed to drive cars, let alone lead entire countries. In a baffling case of foot-to-mouth disease, Gonsalves congratulated his Caracas counterpart and called the laughable process that has renewed Venezuela's subscription to rapid economic decline, free and fair. Perhaps this is some sort of bid to enlist the help of Maduro in rebuilding the shredded remains of Petit Martinique and the other unfortunately affected victims of Hurricane Beryl. St. Vincent's failed alternative strategy of blaming globalization for their inability to construct anything but strong breeze fodder hasn't quite mobilized the expected global response. Maybe Comrade Ralph should take another lesson or two from Chairman Motley on how to beg more eloquently. This discordant note in CARICOM will no doubt erode the bloc's credibility, lest we forget Gonzalo's best bud, Maduro, was threatening to carve off a third of Guyana's land area a mere months ago. And now, onto the long talk. In today's discussion, the Caribbean's declining numbers. The population crisis threatens our way of life. An ominous warning from Prime Minister Mia Motley to the people of Barbados, reiterating the precarious situation the country is heading towards as a result of the declining number of tax-paying youth on the island. Barbados, like most of the Caribbean and the world in general, is grappling with the looming effects of net negative population replenishment. This means that there aren't enough people being born to replace all the ones pushing up daisies. Even more disastrous is the large number of people who have one foot in the grave but aren't contributing anything to the economy anymore through their labor or taxes. All those retirees. The Prime Minister has taken to the airwaves, pleading for people to make like God intended and be fruitful and multiply. Her message has been met with a collective sucking of teeth and much-deserved eye roll. Why would any sane person have a child in Barbados? You see, as a welfare state, Barbados prides itself on a rather large social security net, providing quote-unquote free services to its citizens backed by taxes. Bajans enjoy free dental until 18, relatively free healthcare, inexpensive tertiary education. With a population of 260,000 as of the last census, ensuring bright smiles and bachelor degrees in every household is turning out to be a costly endeavor. To fund these perks, Barbadians have accepted their place on the podium as one of the most heavily taxed countries on earth. Their taxes on most imported goods, vehicles, fuel, even internet services like Netflix and Spotify. Income tax sits at a deceptively reasonable 10.5% for most, leaving any remaining salary to be promptly eviscerated by a sales tax of 17.5% on everything from cereal to canned air, and even further compounded by the existing import taxes used to procure the items in the first place. Children are no longer claimable dependents for income tax, disincentivizing reproduction from the get-go. As for those degrees they've been using the income tax to churn out, they leave the island. With a stagnant labor market and the eulogy having been read for most industries outside of tourism decades ago, newly graduated bachelors in art history aren't exactly swimming in opportunities. The equally childless PM Motley is now left with a country of closed legs, all with access to an open airport, and she seems keen to enact her latest attempt to right the sinking ship, or at least replace the crew who've jumped off the side. Enter immigration. Motley has hinted at turning to external markets to shore up the local workforce and lazy baby production. History, however, does not paint an image of success for this particular solution. The Caribbean has simply never had any political appetite, foundation, or even social structure to support beneficial immigration. Skipping over that unfortunate incident of forced migration via the West African Citizen Relocation and Rehabilitation Scheme, more affectionately called slavery, there has been no major movement of people into the region for any reason other than someone with a gun made me do it. And no, indentureship doesn't count. Those poor people were tricked into coming here. Long story short, there is no reason to actually come here to live. Sun, sand, and sea are great for a few weeks stay, but eventually most tourists want to return to their stable democracies with working bus and transit networks. Save for the Bahamas and Belize, not a single CARICOM state has seen a net positive immigration rate since 2020. The pieces of paradise are slowly becoming ghost rocks that have so desperately clung to Banana Republic-style economic development that they've thoroughly forgotten how to run themselves as countries that people would actually like to live in. During the pandemic, the Barbados government began its first quiet experiment with temporary immigration in the form of something called the Welcome Stamp. In the first year, lockdowns, a volcanic eruption, and a hurricane likely turned all notions of working in paradise on its head. The scheme was designed to allow foreign workers to spend up to a year working and residing in Barbados with a few caveats. Namely, they must work for a non-local company, so remote work only, make at least $50,000 USD per year, have pre-existing medical insurance that is compatible with the local healthcare providers, and they can't seek any local employment, obviously. The government has been reluctant to provide any sort of in-depth data on the success of this program, likely due to the ineffective nature of its structure that any first-year social science student could have pointed out from a mile away. As of December 2023, out of the 4,900 applicants, 2,900 were approved, mainly from the USA, UK, and Canada. There's no indication of how many have actually made the move, nor was any indication given as to how many have stayed. If you're curious as to what could have prompted those 2,900 people to bite the bullet, well, wonder no longer. I took the liberty of having a short discussion with a welcome stampede in Barbados. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Lot Along Talk segment of Disgruntled Musings. I am here with Sydney Braddock, a welcome stamp guest residing here in Barbados. Sydney, it is wonderful to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Toasty, but doing quite well so far. Excited for this short segment where we basically give the experience of a welcome stamp user here on the island, and in the greater context of immigration, what that really means, what that experience could mean for immigration in Barbados going forward, and what you bring to the table, essentially, if we're going to have a lot more Sydneys running around in the near future. We're hoping for a lot more Sydney's people. She is amazing. Yeah, first up, what made you decide on Barbados?
Yeah, for a little bit of context, my wife and I moved here with our dog, and we're a single income household. I make the money. So we were trying to find somewhere that was affordable, which I know sounds hilarious to Bajan, that we find Barbados to be affordable.
That is wild, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But comparatively, we were living on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, where rent for a single bedroom apartment would be probably close to 2,000 Canadian dollars a month, as well as grocery costs rising, gas very expensive since it's an island, and not a lot of community there either. So we were looking at, okay, we can go anywhere. We don't have any tethers. We have no kids. We have family everywhere. So we can go wherever, do whatever we want. So we started looking at places outside of Canada of where to move, because our options in Canada were somewhere extremely expensive or in the middle of absolutely nowhere, where the closest shop would be 45-minute drive away, and it would be in Saskatchewan, like flat prairie land. And if that's your thing, great, not our thing. So we started looking at countries like Australia. Australia was a big one. Here, everywhere, just to see like where would accept us, where would be affordable for one income that we could make it and be independent. And my wife has some health issues, so that is also something that we've had to consider. Her health is stable now, but because of her disability, some countries actually deny you based on that because they think that you'll be a drain on their health system, even though you would pay out of pocket for it. So Barbados does not have any requirements for disabled people. They won't deny you based on disability. So that's one thing that we looked at. We also looked at communicable diseases. Since my wife is disabled, she's immunocompromised. So we had to look at, okay, we can't go anywhere that has yellow fever or anything like that because she's unable to take live vaccines. So she wouldn't be immune against those things. So we had to keep in mind health, affordability, community, and also wanted to be somewhere beautiful. And that left Barbados.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
We are honored that you chose us. One particular question I really need to touch on, I don't know if you're aware, but the Caribbean is not exactly, how do you say, beacon of civil rights when it comes to LGBTQ standings, rights, laws, etc. Has that been a challenge for you in terms of things like insurance or medical care here in Barbados, given that we don't have many provisions in place at all for same-sex unions, couples, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. That is something that I was nervous about moving here. Being from Canada, where we could hold hands down the street, doesn't matter. No one will say anything to you. We got married legally. I was definitely nervous about moving here. The first obstacle that we encountered was actually applying for the visa. We met with an immigration lawyer before applying for the visa. That is here. So we just Zoomed her and asked about that process. Since we are same-sex, married, how does that work? Would they take us as spouses? Would we have to apply individually? So we ended up having to put the visa in my name and put my wife, Jaslyn, as my dependent. So she is not legally my wife on our visas. She's my dependent. And that's the same for insurance as well.
Oh, okay. A bit of, how do you say, loopholing there in order to make the ends meet. Now, in terms of, for example, the infrastructure you've encountered, obviously you drive, etc. Has there been like a huge drop off in, for example, service availability, utilities, internet, electricity, that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. Where we lived on Vancouver Island, it got a lot of wind and rainstorms. as well as some snowstorms. It was quite mild as far as snow, but we would get frequent power outages in the wintertime, and we had a wood stove that we would keep warm with. So I was used to having power outages. We had well water, so we had to use filtered water to drink from because our water tasted like pennies. So I lived rurally before this, so I definitely wasn't like city living. But now we live out very far in St. Joseph, which is the bush. And we do get random power outages, which is interesting. We get probably once or twice a month. We get just a couple hours, just no power for absolutely no reason that we can't figure out. So that is one thing. The cost of electricity is actually comparable to Canada. We, as Canadians, we have a very large dog his breed is Swiss, so he is not acclimatized to the heat. So we have to keep the air conditioning on pretty much 24/7 for him, so that's quite expensive, but worth it for his comfort as well as mine. I'm Canadian. I can't handle this heat. Yeah, and driving as well. That was something that I really had to get used to. I was terrified at first. You drive on the other side of the road here compared to Canada, and the steering wheel is obviously on the right side instead of the left. So there was a lot of adapting there, as well as the roundabouts. Where I grew up in Nova Scotia, they had a few roundabouts, so I was used to those, but really surprised with how many roundabouts there were, as well as how little speed limit signs there were. Like, I never know what speed I'm allowed to be going.
Wow. I think generally it's 60 or 80. Don't quote me on this. I'm not the licensing authority, but wherever you don't see a speed sign, oh my, I don't even drive. One would think they would hand you the driver's permit, the pamphlet they hand every driver when they're learning on arrival to Barbados. Like, here's how you drive here. But they're just like, oh, you guys are a member of the Commonwealth. You'll figure it out. But yeah, I think it's around 60 to 80 for just about every road if you don't see a sign.
I just go with the flow of traffic unless they're going extremely fast.
Yeah. That's how they design our roads as well. Does it make sense to put a no? Just go with the flow. What's your vibe telling you? 4 roads meeting? A roundabout. That's what that feels like.
Another thing is how aggressive some drivers are here. There's no road rage, but just if you're going slower than they want to be going, they are riding your bumper, and at the first moment, they will pass you extremely fast. And that was shocking to me.
What I will tell you, I've only been to I've been to 4 other countries. The drivers, I think Barbadians might be the worst. I apologize in advance for my countrymen. They're not particularly patient individuals. None of them seem to know how to actually go around a roundabout, but they will tell you how to go around a roundabout, how they want you to go around the roundabout when they're on it. How have you found the road quality? Because I know there's a running joke that it's one big pothole with bits of road in it. That's the road driving experience.
So where I grew up in Nova Scotia, it had about the same amount of potholes, but that was because with all the snowfall, there was a lot of plowing, and plows dig up the asphalt over time and degrade it. So I was used to potholes. I will say, once you get going into the country, the roads are absolutely despicable. It's insane how bumpy they are. So that was also an adjustment, and how narrow they are.
And yes, our road network is about 1,500 kilometers of actual road. Some of it very thinly toes the line between road and cart track. So don't follow Google Maps. It'll take you into a cane field without a second thought. But you basically live in a cane field, so I don't really know if...
I do, yeah.
Yeah, you're surrounded by cane. You're a cane, it's cane on all sides. It's for you.
Yeah.
But it is beautiful. I envy you, except the power outage bit, I would lose my mind. Now, to the meat of the situation, the welcome stamp was devised as a sort of stopgap during the pandemic. And it's been continued for the most part because at this point, it feels like Barbados is testing the waters with regards to immigration. And as we would have discussed out of the call, of course, that the population of the country is declining rather quickly for a rock in the Atlantic with a bell-shaped, upside-down, umbrella-shaped age distribution curve, which is placing a huge strain on the working population to continue to provide for the aging, not geriatric, I don't want to sound mean, retired population. Now, we're looking to bring fresh blood because our Prime Minister is looking to immigration to stave off this problem, but we're looking to get fresh blood, educated professionals to come in and fill some of those spaces. The welcome stamp might not be the best case for that because if I recall, you don't pay income tax. You're not double taxed, correct?
I do not. I pay Canadian taxes, and I work for a Canadian company.
Wow. Okay. That's okay. That's strike one against the welcome stamp, but we still have you here. You're paying VAT. That's 17.5% of just about everything, including the air you breathe. Trust me. So we've got that going for us. But do you think that if, given the experience you've had so far, does Barbados seem to be a destination to you that is welcoming to a young professional?
That's a great question. I will say, at first, I did not think so. This was purely because I was having trouble finding much of a community of people like me, of young professionals. I tried to connect with fellow Canadians that were expats here, but they all are very much older than I am. So trying to find a community here. But now I have found like a professional network of younger people that I feel have been very accepting, and I am still seen as a tourist when I go out. So I do still get people asking me if I'd like to buy souvenirs, people asking me if I'd like to rent a jet ski or want a taxi. So I still don't look like a local, and I'm not a local, but I'm also not a local. So it's this odd kind of middle ground.
Now, barring the power outages, which are, I've been told, a hindrance to productivity, because you can't exactly send your work via smoke signal. But have you found the rest of the infrastructure or the other opportunities available? Have they been, how do you say, conducive to your workflow, etc.?
Yeah, I think so. When my internet or my power goes out, I use my phone data. So I have a local phone. I just hotspot my computer and I'm still able to work. It's not an interruption for me, though I would imagine it is for others. I have that luxury of being able to purchase data and use it that way. But yeah, I love going into local cafes and working if I don't feel like I'm productive at home. Sometimes you need a little bit of a change of scenery. So going out to cafes to really get my mind on my work is something that is accessible, easy for me to do. There's tons of cafes with free Wi-Fi, delicious coffee. And at home, I have my own little home setup. It's perfect.
Wonderful. Now, obviously, the welcome stamp is not a permanent solution, but you have to renew every year or so, don't you? How long have you been living here so far, by the way?
I have been here 11 months to the day.
11 months. Okay. Are you looking to renew at the end of your first tenure?
I am.
Okay. And how much is that going to put you down the hole?
Oh my goodness. Great question. Let me double check that. It's a lot. It's multi-thousands of dollars.
Canadian or Barbadian?
It's in US dollars for some reason.
I think that was the original target audience and they missed the mark on that one.
Yeah, for sure. Let me see here. It was 11 months ago. I don't remember. Okay, yes. So we did the family bundle, which is US dollars $3,000. So 6,000 Bajan.
Okay. Sydney, you went for the welcome stamp home premium edition with all the bells and whistles that the ultimate edition does not. I wonder if there is an ultimate edition. It'd be wild, wouldn't it? Like, Ultimate Edition users get access to Parliament for absolutely free. We just hand you a key. Okay, I think what I'm trying to figure out in this segment, is this an actual solution? So I guess my question would be, would you recommend your own process? Would you recommend the welcome stamp to others?
I would. I really would. It was an easy process. The hardest part was bringing our animal here. Animal import is extremely difficult, but if you're not bringing an animal, super easy. You just get your passport, you have your proof of income, you apply, and within days, you're either rejected or accepted, and you're good to go. No, it was really easy. I would recommend it. My wife and I are considering staying. I know after 3 years, you're able to apply for citizenship. So we're even looking into that to make this our forever home.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question, if there were provisions for you to transition into a more permanent resident, but it's full-on citizenship that you can head to after 3 years. That is actually unique in terms of nomad visas because there is no immediate path to citizenship for most nomad visas throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. A lot of people don't realize that. Usually the government doesn't only see the nomad visa as a source of revenue, as a way to enhance their economy, but they also see it as a source of revenue. In much the same way that the US Department of State sees your applications for visas, you wouldn't be aware of this because you're from North Dakota, Canada, from America's hat. But basically America uses visa applications as a form of government revenue. In some ways, it is actually incentivized for them to reject you. And For nomad visas, they're not going to reject you, obviously, but there is an entire legal process that you've been through, etc., that you have to keep doing year after year. But most countries do not offer a path to a more concrete residency situation after the fact. Colombia, which gives you a 2-year stay, you can apply as many times as you want, but there is no path to citizenship. There's no path to residency either. And this is aimed at young business professionals who they would hope are going to start businesses. I've also realized that Barbados hasn't really framed this as such. They just want you to bring your Canadian dollars. They don't really, and the sad thing is that Barbados does not have very much of a, a small burgeoning business environment. It doesn't have a huge enough base, and the facilities, the policies that are in place don't exactly, foster an individual such as yourself just coming down here and starting a business. For one thing, I don't know if you met up with our foreign exchange controls. I don't know if that would be something that would impact you. Have you encountered those restrictions?
I have not. I will say they make it very clear when applying that you are not allowed to work in Barbados. You are not allowed. You cannot collect $1 from a local business. You are bringing your income from a different company here and spending it on local businesses. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's actually pretty standard for all of them because, quite frankly, they don't want the bells and whistles of labor laws. And they also don't want Uncle Sam, in your case, Uncle Trudeau, reaching into Barbados's very shambolic labor records to try to find out what has Sydney been up to this last year.
And I will say, I don't want to take a job from a local. I don't want that.
Would you believe it? We don't either.
Not ethically. If someone else is Bajan and they're eligible for this job, I don't want to take that from them as someone that's Canadian.
It'd be very difficult for you to do that because, listeners, I can't believe I've introduced this wonderful person to the podcast and we don't even know what she does. Sydney, what do you do?
Good question. I work for a digital marketing agency based in Montreal, Canada. I do email as well as SMS and mobile app marketing for direct-to-consumer businesses based in Shopify online.
Okay, that is an impressive spread, impressive lineup, impressive skill set. You actually probably could take a job from a local. You made the right choice there. She's ethical, guys. That's the sort of person we're looking for. However, in the future, if this program does evolve, it could be the case where they do want people to come and work here. The issue is what makes the welcome stamp so lucrative also makes it not as helpful as it could be to Barbados's immigration problems. Like I said, our population is aging, our workforce is in decline, and we're looking for people to pay taxes. Enticing Canadians, British individuals, and Americans to hop on over and then they don't pay taxes is counterproductive. This did come from the pandemic side of things. They want people to come here and inject some life, inject some foreign exchange. You're probably a very good source of foreign exchange because if you bring Canadian dollars with you, you bring US dollars with you. So that's the thing that they're looking for. But in terms of the immediate socio-economic problems we're having in terms of our welfare services, because you're Canadian, so you are aware of the huge social net that our individual countries do provide for citizens.
My wife benefited from Canadian disability. We are familiar with what the government is able to give, and I understand the struggle of getting welcome stampers to pay taxes as well, to help out with those things and not be a drain.
Yeah, there's no way you can possibly be a drain. Essentially, the welcome stamp as is does keep you in a bubble, and that is by design so that they don't have to go through all the red tape of bringing you on board, but also because it wouldn't be very lucrative if you had to pay taxes in Barbados and Canada. It's not something someone wants to do, especially since you're not a resident, you're not a citizen, you're not guaranteed citizenship. But at the end of this, you can apply, and that's why you've made clear. But I don't think any sane person wants to pay the 10.5% income tax that Barbados has waiting for you at the other end of that particular rainbow. So, speaking of bubble, I think my next question to you here is just let's wheel back to the cultural side of things. Have you been able to integrate culturally into Barbados's slower lifestyle, etc.? And as a member of the LGBTQ community, have you been able to find your space here?
Yeah, that's a great question. It took a long time for me. When we first moved here, since we are further out, I'm about a half hour from civilization in driving. So I felt very isolated at first. I'm used to having a lot of family surrounding me and a lot of friends that I grew up with surrounding me and knowing I have a place with them. This is the first time I've ever moved anywhere that I didn't know anyone except for my partner. So that was huge, as well as learning a new culture was huge. I had never been in a building where I was the only white person. until I moved here. Where I grew up is very white. Seeing that was really cool to me, actually. And the slower lifestyle is something that I'm still trying to adapt to. I'm used to being very fast paced. My job is fast paced. I was an athlete. I am quick. I just like getting a lot of things done quickly. And I remember the first week that we were here, I was in a Massey supermarket and kind of like power walking down an aisle. And someone said, "Hey, slow down." Oh, so I've had to force myself to slow down.
This is hilarious. Our road rage is on the road and yours is when you're on 2 feet.
Correct.
Okay, just to give like some final context on the welcome stamp for our listeners. Obviously, it does also have salary requirement. I believe you told me it was 50,000.
Yes, 50,000 US dollars.
50,000 USD. You can tell how direly a country is in that situation based on, not necessarily because there are wealthier countries out there that just simply don't want the brokies to show up on the shores and start sucking up welfare. But in terms of the Caribbean islands, our nomad programs tend to be very averse to anyone making low income, obviously, because they don't want you to be a drain. On one hand, there's virtually no way you could be a drain on social services because you were required to come here with your insurance and everything intact, ready to go, etc., and make sure that you have a compatible insurance policy with the medical services here in Barbados. So it reeks of gilding the lily, as you would put it, in terms of making sure you're making enough money, making sure that your social services are all in order. But for Barbados, it spells out exactly how direly in need of individuals like you we are, because across the Caribbean, you'll see that the salary requirements are so much lower, especially in Latin America. They're so much lower than Barbados, for example. Colombia has about $950 a month. Panama is 32,000 a year. And here we are, Barbados going, hey, you need to be able to survive the suburbs in downtown Toronto if you're going to be able to move to Barbados, which also says a lot about the state of cost of living here. I know you touched on it earlier, but what was the most shocking thing for you in terms of price difference? You said this is comparable.
Groceries.
Oh, groceries. Wow. I don't know why I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, I will say I was living in farmland where we were. So local obviously is cheaper here as well. But of course, as a Canadian, you want to have like your little comfort snacks from home. And those are insanely expensive because they are imported, obviously. And I always have to remind myself that the prices are in Barbados dollars, not Canadian. So when I see something, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's expensive. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's in Barbados dollars. But still, our grocery bill is more expensive here than it likely would be, though I haven't been to Canada in a year. I don't know their grocery prices right now.
Okay, I know I'm supposed to be fully on board with the Barbados welcome stamp here and promoting that as a citizen, but Colombia for 150 US, you could probably get 2 weeks of groceries.
Yeah, but then I'd have to go to Colombia.
¿Tienes un problema con Colombia? Besides having to learn Spanish, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
I know French, not Spanish, but I think also we were looking at Colombia. There was just a communicable disease that Jazz wasn't able to be protected against, and that's why we vetoed it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, living. And Jazz is my wife, to clarify.
Yes, indeed. Just one final question. If there is, how do you say, one thing about this entire process one piece of feedback you have for the entire process of applying for this visa, what would that feedback be?
Ooh, I think having some more organization in terms of the countries talking to each other. It's a different process if you're coming from Canada than if you're coming from the US, than if you're coming from the UK. And all of the requirements are different. So it would be nice if they had just solid, this is what you need, no matter where you are from, because there's a lot of conflicting information online. And we ended up having to call here from Canada to really figure out what we needed to do in order to come. So it's a bit convoluted online.
You know what? I'm not even surprised if you've seen the process for getting any diplomatic document process going in the Caribbean. But I do understand this feedback is going nowhere. This episode is basically going to be like a shredder with the word feedback written on the box. I don't think there's anyone from the immigration department actually listening here. But we do. I think the Prime Minister is subscribed to our podcast. So maybe she'll be able to do absolutely nothing. Don't count on anything happening.
I will give a shout out to Diane from the Welcome Stamp office. She was awesome.
Diane, if you're listening, we hope you're listening. In fact, I need to send the episode to her after so she can hear her shout out. Diane, the real OG, Cindy is grateful.
She was so helpful. 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. Sydney, it's been amazing. I'm 11 months late, but welcome to Barbados. We're going to hope to see you around. Perhaps we can have you on another episode in the future, because here at the CPSI, we do cover quite a few socioeconomic issues when it relates to the Caribbean. And as a member of the LGBTQ community, that is one of our platforms for enabling better civil access, rights, etc. across the region. So it has been an amazing opportunity to have you here.
Thank you. It was really fun to talk about my experience. I'm glad I can help in some way, teach people my experience.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
And there you have it. High prices that somehow trump Barbados' own may just be the primary reason for young business people to take a shot at living on a tiny island in the Atlantic that doesn't even recognize common law unions. But as an experiment, the welcome stamp fails on several fronts. Its recipients don't pay any taxes, and they don't work in Barbados, and aren't double taxed. It does not address non-conventional family migration. After all, the island's government does not seem to think that homosexuals exist or even have money. Finally, it can't mask the lack of infrastructure that is needed to turn the island into a true hub of business. The housing stock is inadequate. Barbados' social structure does not lend itself to any influx of individuals with different ideals from the locals. After all, it is unlikely that these immigrants will be afforded voting privileges, or that any government would be keen to import a voter base that could potentially turn against them entirely. Immigrants will likely be pro-immigrant, which could easily clash with the wider population that is objectively insular. You need look no further than CARICOM itself, which is still unable to properly ratify freedom of movement amongst the CSME member states. Put plainly, tiny rocks simply don't ponder the intricacies of people moving to them. Miss Motley may save herself some embarrassment in remembering this. This has been Disgruntled Musings, a proudly produced CPSI podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, check out our other podcasts and published works at cpsi.media.